The first thing the warlord noticed was how small the human looked. Too thin, too fragile, like something that should have snapped in the first week of battle. Yet there he sat across the table, drinking something hot and bitter from a metal cup, as if this were a casual meeting instead of a discussion about war. Sarath had led campaigns across half the known galaxy, his fleet breaking the backs of empires that had stood for centuries. He had crushed rebellions, obliterated entire armies, and seen horrors that turned lesser beings to dust. And yet, this human had not flinched when their gazes met, had not looked away in deference or fear. It was unsettling. The room was quiet, save for the occasional mechanical hum of the ship's systems. The human, Captain Davis, took another sip from his cup, then leaned back slightly as if he had all the time in the world. His uniform was worn but clean, the insignia on his shoulder unfamiliar to Sarath, but clearly important to the human. His face bore old scars, the kind that only came from battles fought up close. There was no fear in his eyes. There was something else. "You said you wanted to understand how we fight?" Davis finally said, setting his cup down with a soft clink. "What exactly do you want to know?" Sarath folded his arms across his massive chest. "Your records speak of victories against forces that outnumbered and outgunned you." "I have read the data. The numbers make no sense. I want to hear it from you. I want to understand how a species as weak as yours survives in war." Davis let out a short breath. Not quite a laugh, but close. "Weak? That's a new one. Usually the other side figures it out the hard way." Sarath bristled, but kept his expression neutral. "Enlighten me." The human stretched his arms, fingers cracking as if preparing for a long conversation. "All right, I'll start with something simple. The Battle of Hell's Ridge." Sarath had seen the name in the files, a world reduced to nothing but frozen rock and wreckage. The reports had made no sense to him. The human forces should have been annihilated in the first week. "We were outnumbered 20-1, Davis began. "No air support, no reinforcements. The enemy had better equipment, better supply lines, and they were dug in deep. We were supposed to hold a position at the top of a ridgeline, but by the second night we were completely surrounded. No way out." Sarath nodded. The logical course of action would be surrender. Davis smirked. That's what they thought too. "See, humans don't fight fair. We knew they had better weapons, so we stopped fighting like soldiers. We fought like something else." He leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. "We waited for them to get comfortable, let them think we were broken. Then we hit them in the dark." Sarath listened, unmoving. Davis continued. "They had the numbers, so we made them paranoid. We crawled through the snow at night, slit throats, stole supplies, left bodies where their commanders would find them. We made them hear things that weren't there. They started shooting at shadows. We let them." Sarath's mind worked through the strategy. It was madness. It was effective. The third night, they abandoned one of their supply drops, too scared to retrieve it. We took everything we could carry. Then we started using their own weapons against them. They didn't know who was an enemy anymore. Davis shook his head slightly. After a week, their commanders stopped sleeping. After 2, they stopped trusting their own men. After 3, they tried to retreat. We cut them off. By the end of the 4th week, we walked down that ridge alive, and they didn't. Sarath did not respond immediately. He had fought enemies that were brutal, merciless, even dishonourable. But this was something else. This was war designed to break the mind before the body. Davis picked up his cup again, took another sip. "That answer your question?" Sarath leaned forward, his massive hands pressing against the table. "Your tactics defy reason. You break the rules of combat, fight without honour, refuse surrender even when it is logical." He narrowed his eyes. "Why?" Davis shrugged. "Because winning is the only thing that matters. Honor doesn't keep you alive. Rules don't win wars. And if we have to become something worse than our enemy to make sure we survive, we will. Sarath had no immediate reply. He had come here expecting arrogance or bravado, but what he found was something far colder. Humans did not fight for glory or conquest. They fought to win, at any cost. And that made them dangerous in a way he had never encountered before. Sarath had spent years studying war, refining strategies, perfecting the art of conquest. Yet this conversation unsettled him in a way no battlefield ever had. He had crushed empires, shattered fleets, but he had never encountered an enemy that seemed to thrive on turning war itself into a psychological weapon. He exhaled slowly, keeping his voice measured. You did not win that battle with strength. You won by breaking their mind. That is not war. That is something else. Davis tilted his head slightly, the same quiet confidence in his expression. War isn't just about who has the biggest guns. It's about knowing what the other guy is afraid of and using it against him. Sarath tapped a claw against the table. Fear is temporary. Soldiers recover. You may gain an advantage, but against a determined enemy, your methods would eventually fail. Davis chuckled. You think so? Let me tell you about Black Hollow. Sarath had seen the reports, a nameless rock in the void, now nothing but a burned-out husk. The data suggested an overwhelming human victory despite insurmountable odds. The details had always been vague. Now he was about to find out why. Davis leaned forward. It was supposed to be a suicide mission. Enemy fleet was too strong, defences too tight, but we didn't go in guns blazing. We infiltrated first, a few men hidden among wreckage. No direct assault, no immediate show of force. We let them think we were scavengers. He tapped the table lightly. Then we started spreading rumours, fake distress signals, false reports of mutiny, made them question each other. Sarath's grip tightened. You turned them against themselves. Davis nodded. By the time our main force arrived, they had already done half the work for us. Commanders were executing their own officers for treason. Supply chains had collapsed, and their own soldiers were too busy watching their backs to fight us. We walked in and finished the job. Sarath narrowed his eyes. You won without a battle. You destroyed them from the inside. Exactly. Davis took another sip from his cup, as if discussing something trivial. That's the thing about humans. We don't just fight. We dismantle. We don't need to outgun you if we can make you doubt your own forces. War isn't about honour. It's about survival. Sarath's mind reeled at the implications. Every species he had fought adhered to some form of structured combat. Even the most ruthless enemies had limits, rules they followed. But these humans had none. They fought with an understanding of war that was disturbingly precise, efficient, terrifying. He finally spoke. What happens when your tactics are used against you? What happens when an enemy learns to fight like you? Davis smirked. They never do, because they think they can win without sinking to our level, and by the time they realize they can't, it's already too late. Sarath knew the truth of those words. He had seen it in the records, in the countless reports of conflicts that should have ended in human defeat. And yet, they endured, again and again. A long silence stretched between them. Sarath's claws flexed lightly against the surface of the table. You fight as though there is nothing to lose. Davis held his gaze. That's because we've already lost too much. We know what happens if we fail, and we don't intend to let it happen again. There was something cold in those words, something that went beyond tactics or strategy. Sarath had fought enemies who sought conquest, revenge, power. But humans fought like creatures with nothing left but the will to make sure their enemies suffered before they did. He exhaled slowly. You are unlike any species I have faced. Davis nodded. That's why you're here, isn't it? You wanted to understand. Sareth studied him for a long moment. He had come expecting arrogance, expecting bravado, but what he found was something much worse: understanding. Sareth had never been shaken before. He had fought across countless battlefields, survived wars that had ground civilizations to dust, and stood victorious where others had fallen. Yet sitting across from this human, listening to the stories of warfare unlike anything he had encountered, he found himself questioning everything he knew about victory and survival. He took a slow breath, his mind racing through every lesson he had ever learned. Strength, strategy, honor. These had always been the foundation of his conquests. But the humans, they fought with something else, something raw, something terrifying in its simplicity. They fought to ensure the enemy never recovered. Davis leaned back in his chair, studying Sareth's reaction with that same calm gaze. I can see the gears turning in your head. You're wondering if everything you've ever believed about war has been a lie. I get it. I've seen that look before. Sareth's jaw tightened. You fight without limits, without structure. How do you ensure you do not become the very thing you seek to destroy? Davis exhaled through his nose. That's the trick, isn't it? The line between survival and monstrosity is thin. But we've learned something. If we hesitate, if we let doubt slow us down, we lose. And humans don't like losing. Sareth considered that. He had always seen war as a matter of tactical superiority. The side that planned best, the side that struck hardest, the side that understood the battlefield. It always won. And yet, here sat a warrior who had abandoned all those principles, who had rewritten the rules, and whose people still stood undefeated. He leaned forward. And if an enemy refused to break, if they adapted, if they countered your tactics? Davis gave a small smile, as if Sareth had finally asked the right question. Then we go deeper. We hit them where they least expect. We destroy the things they don't even realize they rely on. Supply chains, trust, belief. We don't fight the soldiers. We fight the system that keeps them standing. Sareth had always thought himself prepared for any answer. This one sent a cold weight through him. These humans didn't just fight wars. They dismantled their enemies from the inside out. It wasn't strength that made them terrifying. It was their ability to think like something beyond warriors. He tapped his fingers against the table. You reshape the battlefield itself. Davis nodded. Every war is different, but every enemy has a weakness. The trick is finding it before they realize what's happening. Sareth sat in silence, absorbing everything. His people had fought for centuries, believing in discipline, in tactics, in facing war as a structured engagement. He now understood why the humans always emerged from conflict standing. They were not merely warriors. They were something else entirely. Something adaptable. Something that didn't just survive war, but thrived in it. You are not conquerors, Sareth said at last. You are something worse. Davis smiled, but there was no joy in it. We're survivors, and survivors do what they have to. Sareth stood, his massive frame looming over the human. Yet, despite the difference in size, the difference in power, he no longer felt like the superior one. He gave Davis a slow nod, a gesture of understanding more than respect. I have learned more from this conversation than from 100 battles. Davis stood as well. And what will you do with that knowledge? Sareth turned toward the exit, his mind already turning over everything he had learned. His people would need to change. He would need to change. Because if there was one lesson the humans had taught him, it was that those who refused to adapt were doomed to fall. And he refused to fall. Sareth stood at the command deck of his warship, gazing at the void of space stretching endlessly before him. The conversation with Davis had been weeks ago, yet the words still echoed in his mind, reshaping his understanding of war. He had led his people to countless victories, built an empire on the bones of the fallen. But now he saw the cracks in his own foundation: strength, numbers, tactics. None of it would be enough against an enemy who understood the battlefield in ways he never had. The Grand Council of the Dominion had demanded answers. Why had he halted the campaign? Why had he ignored the momentum of war? He had no words to satisfy them. How could he explain that he had glimpsed the future, and in it his kind was not victorious? Not against an enemy like humanity. Not against those who wielded war like an artist wielded a brush, shaping the very perception of battle before the first shot was ever fired. A lieutenant approached, bowing his head respectfully. "High Warlord, the Council expects your report. Shall we prepare the fleet to resume our assault?" Sarath did not answer immediately. He turned, studying the young warrior, one of the finest, bred for combat, conditioned to believe in the unbreakable strength of the Dominion. "Tell me," Sarath said, "what is the greatest weapon in war?" The lieutenant did not hesitate. "Superior firepower, High Warlord," Sarath nodded slowly. "That is what I once believed. But firepower is finite. It is a tool, nothing more. What happens when the enemy takes that tool from you, when they make you question your own strength?" The lieutenant's expression wavered slightly, but he stood firm. "Then we adapt, High Warlord. We fight harder." Sarath stepped closer. "And what if they know how you will adapt? What if they fight a battle that is not on the battlefield at all? What if they make you believe your own forces are against you? What if they make you hesitate before every decision?" The lieutenant swallowed hard. That is not how war is fought." Sarath gave a low, rumbling chuckle. "No, it is not how we have fought, but it is how they fight, and that is why they win." The warlord dismissed the lieutenant with a wave of his hand and turned back to the void. He saw the stars not as distant points of conquest, but as reminders that in this vast universe the old ways of war would not always hold dominion. The humans had shown him that. And so Sarath had a choice: to push forward as before, leading his people to inevitable destruction, or to embrace what he had learned and change. It was a choice he had never imagined he would face. But he knew now that survival belonged not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable. He reached for the console and opened a direct channel to the council chambers. As the holograms of the Dominion's highest commanders materialized, their expressions already questioning his delay, Sarath did something unprecedented. He spoke not of conquest, not of war, but of transformation.